You know, over the past 60 years, it's pretty safe to say that the United States has more or less ruled the world. After the Second World War, the U.S. emerged as a true superpower. And by the early 90s, with the fall of the Soviet Union, America was essentially the only superpower. The one country that could exert its influence and promote its interests anywhere in the world.
It is our opportunity to lead. There's no one else.
Not anymore. Well, at least not according to this guy, Parag Khanna. Parag says the days of America dominating global politics are over. He says a new world order is taking shape with three superpowers: the Americans, China, and the European Union. And the Americans better get used to it. But that's not all. Along with the three superpowers, Parag says there's another movement emerging. Essentially, they're the middle class of countries, the second world. Countries like Uzbekistan, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia. They sit somewhere between the rich and powerful first world and the underdeveloped third world. And we all know the middle class, right? They just might hold the balance of power. Parag says they're shrewd and savvy, and well, that's probably why the second world is the name of his new book. Everybody, please say hello to Parag Khanna. Nice to see you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Good. By the way, I go by Barack now because Parag sounds enough like Barack, so I can pull that off.
So you're
totally ups my cred,
I'm Parag right now. You're like Madonna. That's way. What would you tell Obama? You know, setting the table. It's what, you know, a week and a day before he gets the keys to this once beautiful Cadillac that's now in trouble. Yeah. What do you tell him to do?
Hide. Yeah. He's getting a new car. I don't know if you saw it. They've got a whole new presidential limo for him. So maybe you can just cruise around in that and avoid the world's problems. But no, look, in a week, the world after Bush is still Bush's world, and that's the problem. You know, the messes that have been created, Iraq, Afghanistan, everything. He inherits that. You know, the bad economy, the diminished international credibility. That's all. Those are all weights that are kind of holding him back. You know, so he's going to have to. You know, you can't really wipe the slate clean that easily.
But I wonder also. I think, you know, a lot of this, while it certainly did take a good solid foothold during the Bush presidency, this stuff was coming anyway. You know, like the globalized world was creating a reality where America was not going to be the only, you know, big dog on the block, right?
Believe it or not, Clinton was all about this. He said that the task of the post-Cold War world is to manage globalization. You could say the same thing today. So now we're going on 20 years where people have been saying that we need to manage a world in which there are going to be rising powers, diffusion of power, China, India, Russia, Europe, Brazil, and so forth. So really, for 20 years we've been struggling with this question: how do you manage a globalized world, not one in which America calls the shots? So we haven't gotten it right yet.
And a lot is being made about Obama trying to rebuild some of that image, but I wonder if that's the wrong fight for him to have.
Depends on if it's not just regain America's image, but regain America's leadership for the sake of it, that's the wrong fight. That's not the world that anyone else wants to live in, and survey after survey show that. They want a world in which America is a constructive player, but not one in which everyone has to wait for America to make its decision on what it wants to happen in the Middle East, how it wants the financial world run, how it wants to manage China, and let China decide how China wants to manage China is what most of the world seems to be saying. That's certainly what the Chinese would prefer as well. Same thing goes for India, same thing goes for Brazil, same thing goes for the European Union, you know, even Canada. So I think that it's important for him to not come in with that sort of innate American kind of machismo.
You mentioned the whole groups there. This is about China and the European Union, isn't it?
In my book, it is, in the sense that these are I call them the big three, the three empires that make the rules. You know, between Europe, China, and America, you have most of the world's economy, basically. Even though Brazil and India and Russia are important players in different regions, their economies are a fraction of what China, the EU, and the US are.
So it's not going to be the US-Russia Cold War kind of thing. So what's the relationship like between these three powers?
It's competitive, right? I mean, the way I see it, they are really playing a game that resembles the Cold War in the sense that they're vying for influence and they're competing all over the world for oil, for all kinds of resources. And so the playing field is globalization. You buy influence. Kind of my punchline is, you know, previously you used to conquer colonies. Now you just buy countries. And China is really good at this, by the way. I mean, you only need to study what China does in Latin America and the Middle East and Central Asia, Southeast Asia to see that you buy loyalty, you buy resources, you put a lot of investment in a country and you get a lot of payback in terms of strategic alignment. Everywhere, literally everywhere.
So they're frenemies.
Frenemies, exactly. I put that in my book. Yeah. I had to.
So I mean, so these powers have to find a way to work together, but they can't revert back to the old way of
of countries dealing with each other. You can't be enemies the way they used to be.
Right. I mean, you know, remember, even in the Cold War, there was no direct conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was proxy wars. You know, it was competition through what I call second world countries that are strategic, but you have different views about them. Look at how China views Iran versus the way the U.S. views Iran, right? Sudan, same thing. Burma, same thing. North Korea, same thing. In fact, if you make a list of all the countries that America labels a rogue state, you know, Venezuela, Cuba, and all the ones I just mentioned, now make a list of all the countries that China provides financial backing to, weapons to, diplomatic sort of support to. It's the exact same list. So this is already kind of underway.
Isn't China just doing now what the Americans did in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, and by the way, in their own country, they're doing what America did in the 19th century, which is expanding outward, sort of, you know, colonizing demographically, you know, putting its people out there, occupying resources and terrain and so forth. And most definitely, it's Cold War-esque in terms of if you're going to try and isolate a country, I'm going to throw it a lifeline, you know, and that's what's going on worldwide. It's a game of chess.
So the big thing going on now, then, is this this dysfunctional game of chess in Gaza.
Yeah.
What's happening there? If you're counseling Obama on foreign policy, what do you counsel him to do in relation to the Gaza Strip in Israel and the situation with the Palestinians?
Yeah, well, that's a really broken chess piece, I guess, or you know, a slice of the board. It needs to be. I think we need a two-state solution. This is no time for someone to come in and say, oh, I've got a third idea, you know, that we haven't tried yet. Let's get the one idea that everyone seems to think is right. Let's get that right. So I think if it's, he should, the one thing you have to overcome is democratic politics. Whether it's the 80s, 90s, or today, it's always saying, but wait, let's have another election in Israel, the Palestinian territories, in the U.S. That'll bring a new voice. Well, you're going to have elections every month. You know, you need to actually just have a strategy which everyone agrees to, no matter who's the president or prime minister at any given time.
Do you think Obama would do that? Is he the kind of guy that's going to stand up and go, this is how we're going to proceed with the Middle East?
He's going to have to say, we support a two-state solution. It doesn't matter who's prime minister on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side. Let's go and move towards a de facto settlement of this border and, you know, resolve the status of Jerusalem, right of refugees, and connect Gaza to the West Bank so it can be a somehow coherent geographic entity, and enforce that.
The problem when you campaign, as you know, on change is it better come. And he is inheriting a situation and not just a country situation, but a global situation where I don't know how much power he actually has to affect a real change. Do you think he can, and will he?
I think it's going to be case by case, right? I mean, the global financial crisis is not something that he can unilaterally fix or resolve. The U.S. is printing about as much money as it's going to, and that's a lot of money. It's still not going to solve the problem. You need a new global regulatory framework. You've got ideas coming from Europe, from China, so on. So there is no American answer to that. There's no American answer to the Mideast situation. There's no American answer to Iran only. You're going to have a security dialogue between Gulf Arab countries, Iran, China, Russia are going to be involved. The U.S. isn't going to be able to broker that alone either. So there's not a single problem I can think of where there's just an American solution.
There's two things that I look at that are born on the same island in a sense. You've got Guantanamo Bay for Obama, and the bigger picture is you've got Cuba. He can make a real impact in the world with Cuba, can't he, right off the bat?
He can make a big impact on Cuba, and he can make a big impact on how the U.S. is viewed in Latin America, which is very important. Everyone who talks about grand strategy and foreign policy, they're always like, Obama should go to Berlin, to Moscow, to Tehran, to Beijing. It's like, actually, his first international visit is going to be right here. Yeah. And in April, he'll probably go to the Summit of the Americas. People just neglect Latin America as if it's some footnote in geopolitics. It's a big deal. All the natural resources that America needs, and even, you know, labor partners for industrial production, are all here in this hemisphere. So actually, Obama does need to pay attention to Latin America. And Cuba would be a really good place to start, to just say, I have no dog in that embargo policy. Those 50 years of attempted isolation that has done no good for anyone. I just have no stake in that.
You guys think there are a lot of people in Latin America who, after all the meddling from the Americans in the 70s and 80s, are really happy that they were neglected for a while?
Yeah, probably.
Didn't have to deal with it. When you counsel a campaign, how does that work? What does a guy in your position do?
Well, as you probably know, there were hundreds of foreign policy advisors, and we were broken up into different regional issues. So I was doing South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. There were people doing Europe, doing Russia, doing Latin America, and then people who just did trade, human rights, other kinds of issues. So, you know, online communities, Facebook-style stuff, write up a lot of memos, talking points, debate prep, all those kinds of things, policy memos, which now, they don't get ripped up, but you got to kind of start from scratch and say, oh, wait, now we're actually going to be in the White House, the situation is not what it was when we were drafting ideal memos, but it's the real world. So, you know, you've got to kind of reinvent yourself.
You've been to Afghanistan. Obama's inheriting that too, and he's been public about saying that that's where the focus should be in Afghanistan. A lot of people who've been there say it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah. Well, even before Obama's coming in, the military will tell you that they've already shifted their attention sort of 70% now towards Afghanistan, Pakistan, only 30% to Iraq. So it's definitely where the momentum is going anyway, and now Obama kind of, you know, jumps on that treadmill. And I think that right now they just want to do two things. They want to try and contain the Taliban in the south of the country, and they want to protect Kabul so that they can have an election at some point in 2009, which I suppose they want Hamid Karzai to win again. That's it. Those are the two goals, that and pray. I'm not speaking for the administration, but that's the most you can hope for when a country isn't really a country yet, when it's falling apart.
And ultimately, you just become the mayor of Kabul anyway, don't you?
Well, he already is, yeah.
It's great. The book is called The Second World. You can actually get it in paperback starting in February. Parag Khanna, just Parag. Nice to see you, man. Thanks for coming in. All right, stick around, my friends. We'll be right back.